On the morning of the 10th of June 1991, an 11-year-old girl named Jaycee Dugard left her house on Washoe Boulevard in South Lake Tahoe, California, and walked down the hill to catch her school bus, the same walk she made every school day. Her stepfather watched her go from the yard. That was the last time anyone who knew her saw her. She was not found for 18 years. The man who took her was on active federal parole for kidnapping and rape for every single one of those 18 years. His home address was on file. Officers visited the property. What those visits did and did not document is a matter of public record, and it has never been fully accounted for. Some of what follows is documented in court records, parole files, and a formal state Inspector General report. Some of it has never been fully explained. Viewer discretion is advised. South Lake Tahoe sits at 6,237 feet above sea level, on the California side of the Nevada border, where the Sierra Nevada flattens briefly before the lake itself begins. In June, the snow is mostly gone from the lower elevations, but still visible on the peaks to the west. The pines run right up to the edges of the residential streets. The air smells like pitch and cold water. It is the kind of place that people who grew up there tend to describe with a specific affection, not for the tourist infrastructure along the lake, but for the quieter, inland neighborhoods where families actually lived. Washoe Boulevard is one of those streets. In the early 1990s, it was a residential road running up a moderate hillside, lined with houses set back from the pavement, separated by tall pines and the ordinary markers of suburban life driveways, mailboxes, the occasional basketball hoop. The neighborhood had a school year rhythm to it. Mornings were quiet, but not still. Children walked to bus stops. Parents left for work. The community moved at the pace of ordinary life in an ordinary place, in the ordinary first weeks of summer. This is not a backdrop. It is a specific community, and a specific family lives there. Jaycee Lee Dugard is 11 years old. She is in the 5th grade. In her 2011 memoir, A Stolen Life, she describes herself at this age in terms that are careful and precise. A child who was, by her own account and by the account of her family, quiet and friendly and warm toward the people she trusted. She had not yet entered adolescence. She was at the particular threshold that exists between childhood and the beginning of something more complicated, old enough to walk to the bus stop alone, young enough that her mother still watched the clock on school mornings. Her mother, Terry Probin, described her in interviews as a child who loved animals, who was close with her younger sister, and who moved through the world with the kind of steady, gentle disposition that adults tend to remember about children when they are trying to hold the full picture of who someone was. Jaycee herself writes about the feeling of being loved in that house, about the specific textures of her daily life, her cat, the morning light, the walk down the hill. She is 5th grade. She is 11. She is not a symbol of anything yet. She is a child who lives in a house on Washoe Boulevard and goes to school in the morning and comes home in the afternoon. That is the full and accurate description of her life on the 9th of June 1991. The morning routine on Washoe Boulevard begins early. The bus stop is approximately a half-mile from the house, at the bottom of the hill. The route is straightforward down the residential slope of Washoe Boulevard, past the other houses, to the road below. On a school morning, it takes a child walking at a moderate pace, roughly 10 to 15 minutes. Jaycee makes this walk every school day. It is not a significant event in the life of the household. It is the ordinary mechanism by which a 5th grader gets to school. She leaves the house in the morning. She returns in the afternoon. The walk becomes part of the background rhythm of life on the street, one of dozens of small, unremarkable movements that make up a family's week. The route is not isolated. It passes other houses. There are neighbors. There is the ordinary visual field of a residential neighborhood in the morning: parked cars, driveways, the particular quiet of a street after the earliest commuters have already left and before the day has fully opened. Nothing about the walk, on any of the mornings Jaycee takes it, marks it as significant. That is the nature of a routine. She walks down the hill. She catches the bus. She comes home. This is what her days look like. Terry Probin is in her early 30s in 1991. Carl Probin, Jaycee's stepfather, is a regular presence in the household. Carl and Terry had married, and Carl had taken on the role of a second parent in the family's daily life. He was, by the account of neighbors and family, a present and involved stepfather. On school mornings, Carl was often outside working in the yard, doing the small maintenance tasks that accumulate around a residential property. He was visible. He was there. The household is not defined by any particular tension or difficulty at this point. It is a family in a neighborhood on a hill in South Lake Tahoe, living the life that the neighborhood was built for. Terry goes to work. Carl tends to the house. Jaycee goes to school. Her younger sister is part of the picture of the mornings. It is a family doing what families do, moving through the week, building the unremarkable structure of ordinary life. None of this requires elaboration. The point is not to argue for the family's normality. The point is that normality is exactly what was there, and that it is worth holding before proceeding. It is early June 1991. Jaycee Dugard is 11 years old. The school year is in its final days. Summer is close. The mornings on Washawan Boulevard still carry the cool of the altitude, the smell of pine, the particular stillness of a neighborhood not yet fully awake. In a few days, school will be out. The walk to the bus stop will stop. The rhythm of the school year mornings will give way to the longer, unstructured days of summer. Jaycee is 11 years old, and summer is almost here. On the morning of June 10th, Jaycee left the house at the same time she always did. Her stepfather watched her walk down the hill. He would be the last person who knew her to see what happened next, and what he saw would not be believed for years. This case takes time to understand properly. The details accumulate slowly, and the full picture only emerges when you hold all of it together. If you haven't already, subscribe and turn on notifications. We'll follow this case through every layer of what happened and what was allowed to happen. Stay with it. It is the morning of the 10th of June, 1991. The temperature in South Lake Tahoe is in the low 50s. Carl Probin is outside in the yard on Washawan Boulevard doing yard work. Jaycee leaves the house at her usual time, wearing a pink jacket. She starts down the hill toward the bus stop at the bottom of Washawan Boulevard. The walk is the same walk she has made every school morning. A gray or silver car comes up the hill. It slows as it reaches Jaycee. A man gets out. He uses a stun gun on her. She goes down. He pulls her into the car. The car continues up the hill, turns around, and heads back down, past the house, toward the highway. Carl Probin sees this from the yard. He gets on a bicycle and attempts to follow the vehicle. The car is already accelerating. He cannot close the distance. He watches it move toward the highway and loses sight of it. He returns to the house and calls law enforcement. The call comes in to the El Dorado County Sheriff's Office. The time is recorded. The initial dispatch goes out. Carl Probin reports what he saw. A gray or silver car, a man who exited the vehicle, a child pulled inside. He describes it as clearly and completely as a person who has just witnessed it from a yard at residential distance can describe it. The car is heading toward U.S. Route 50. The El Dorado County Sheriff's Office responds. Within the first hour, deputies are on Washawan Boulevard. The immediate area around the bus stop and the surrounding residential streets is searched. Witness interviews begin with neighbors. An entry is made into the National Crime Information Center Missing Persons Database. The geographic reality of South Lake Tahoe creates an immediate problem for the investigation. The city sits at the southeastern corner of Lake Tahoe, with U.S. Route 50 as the primary corridor connecting it to the Sacramento Valley to the west. A vehicle leaving South Lake Tahoe via Route 50 can reach the Sacramento metropolitan area in under 2 hours. By the time Carl Probin's call is processed and deputies are deployed, the window for intercepting a vehicle on the highway has already narrowed significantly. Officers canvass Washawan Boulevard and the surrounding streets. No additional witnesses come forward who can confirm the direction of travel beyond what Carl Probin has already reported. The car was seen heading toward Route 50. That is the limit of what can be confirmed in the first hours. The search area expands. El Dorado County contacts neighboring jurisdictions. The California Highway Patrol is notified. A description is circulated. A child, age 11, pink jacket, last seen on Washawan Boulevard, taken by an unknown male in a gray or silver vehicle heading westbound. The description is accurate. It is also, given what a vehicle can cover in 2 hours on a California highway, insufficient to generate a stop. By the end of the 10th of June 1991, Jaycee Dugard has not been found. No vehicle matching the description has been identified. The case is active and open. Carl Probin's account of what he witnessed is detailed and specific. He was in the yard. He saw the car. He saw the man exit. He saw what was done to Jaycee, and he saw her taken. He attempted pursuit. He called law enforcement immediately. In the days following the abduction, investigators directed a significant portion of their attention toward Carl Probin. This is documented. The El Dorado County Sheriff's investigation included repeated interviews with Probin, examination of his movements, and scrutiny of his account for inconsistencies. According to subsequent reporting and accounts reviewed by journalists covering the case, investigators questioned whether Probin's story was credible. A man who witnesses a child being abducted from yards away, on a bicycle, and cannot catch a car. The account was treated, in the early phase of the investigation, as at minimum unverified and at maximum suspicious. Probin was not charged. He was not formally named as a suspect in any public filing. He was ultimately cleared of involvement. The investigation eventually accepted that what he reported was what had occurred. The cost of that process is a matter of documented record and legitimate analytical interest. In the first days after an abduction, the period in which a missing child is statistically most likely to be located, if they are to be located at all, Investigative resources in El Dorado County were partially allocated to scrutinizing the stepfather rather than exclusively pursuing the vehicle and the man Probyn had described. This is not a failure unique to El Dorado County in 1991. The academic literature on child abduction investigations, including analysis published by the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, has documented a recurring pattern. When a male family member or household adult is proximate to a child's disappearance, investigative suspicion tends to attach to that person in the early phase, regardless of the specificity or consistency of their account. In cases where the abductor is in fact a stranger, this pattern consumes time that cannot be recovered. The critical window in a stranger abduction is measured in hours. It is not measured in days. Parole Probyn had watched a man take his stepdaughter. He reported it accurately. He was the primary witness to a crime. The investigation treated him, for a period, as a person of interest in it. Probyn was cleared. Jaycee was not found. The vehicle Parole Probyn described was gray or silver. It was a car, not a truck, not an SUV. The year, make, and model were not clearly established from his account. At residential distance, under the conditions of an event that lasted seconds, this is the description a witness produces. In 1991, that description had limited investigative utility. There was no network of highway cameras capable of tracking a vehicle by color across a route. There were no automated license plate readers to flag a gray car leaving the South Lake Tahoe corridor on Route 50. DMV records could be cross-referenced, but a query of gray and silver registered vehicles in California in 1991 would have returned a number in the tens of thousands. Without a partial plate, without a more specific vehicle description, without a secondary witness who had seen the car at closer range, the vehicle description functioned more as confirmation of Parole Probyn's account than as an actionable lead. This is not a criticism of the El Dorado County investigation. It is a description of the investigative environment. In 1991, stranger abductions, where the perpetrator's vehicle was not specifically identified in the first hours, were genuinely difficult to pursue through physical evidence alone. The investigation had what Parole Probyn could provide. It was not enough to locate a vehicle that was already on the highway before the call was made. The car had a head start that the investigation could not close. In the days following the 10th of June 1991, the search for Jaycee Dugard became a public effort. Search parties moved through the areas around South Lake Tahoe. Flyers with Jaycee's photograph and description were distributed. Local media covered the disappearance. The missing persons poster circulated the image that would become, over the following 18 years, the fixed public image of who Jaycee Dugard was, an 11-year-old girl in a pink jacket. Terry Probyn gave interviews. She made public appeals. She described her daughter with the specificity of a parent who is holding every detail close because the details are all that remains. She asked for information. She asked for Jaycee to be returned. The active search phase continued for weeks. It did not produce a confirmed lead. No credible sighting was reported. No vehicle was identified. No person of interest other than Parole Probyn, who had been cleared, was named. By the end of the summer of 1991, the investigation had not closed, but its active phase had wound down in the way that cases wind down when there is nothing left to act on. Jaycee Dugard remained an open missing persons case in the El Dorado County records and in the NCIC database. Her file stayed open. The leads did not come. She was missing. She had been missing for weeks. She would be missing for 6,570 more days. The evidence established in the subsequent investigation and confirmed through Jaycee Dugard's own account, detailed in A Stolen Life and in the proceedings that followed Philip Garrido's 2011 sentencing, is this. On the 10th of June 1991, Jaycee Dugard was transported approximately 200 miles southwest of South Lake Tahoe to Antioch, California, in Contra Costa County. The property was at 1554 Walnut Avenue. It was a residential address in a residential neighborhood. Philip Garrido lived there with his wife, Nancy Garrido. Behind the main structure, Garrido had built a compound of sheds, tents, and enclosed spaces in the backyard, concealed from direct street view and from casual observation. Jaycee was held in that compound. She would not leave it in any meaningful sense for years. She would give birth to two daughters there, the first in 1994 when she was 14 years old, and the second in 1997. She would live in a structure in a backyard in Antioch, California. For the entirety of the period during which her mother was giving interviews about a missing pink jacket and her file sat open in a database 200 miles to the east, the distance between where law enforcement believed Jaycee Dugard might be and where she actually was is 200 miles. It is not a foreign country. It is not an unknown address. The address at 1554 Walnut Avenue, Antioch, California, was a matter of record because the man who lived there was required, by the terms of his federal supervision, to report it. Philip Garrido was not unknown to law enforcement. He had a federal conviction for kidnapping and rape. He was on active federal parole, and his parole officer had the address. 1554 Walnut Avenue, Antioch, California, the exact address where Jaycee Dugard was being held. Philip Garrido's criminal record begins in 1976 in South Lake Tahoe, California, the same community where, 15 years later, he would take Jaycee Dugard. In November of that year, Garrido abducted a woman named Catherine Calloway Hall from a parking lot in South Lake Tahoe. He drove her to a warehouse he had prepared in advance in Reno, Nevada, where he held her and raped her over a period of hours. Hall was eventually rescued when a highway patrol officer noticed Garrido's vehicle parked outside the warehouse and stopped to investigate. Garrido was arrested at the scene. He was charged in federal court. He was convicted of kidnapping and rape. The sentence imposed was 50 years in federal prison. He served 10. Garrido was paroled from federal custody in 1988. He was placed on supervised release, which, given the nature of his conviction, meant he was subject to ongoing parole oversight as a condition of his freedom. He registered as a sex offender in California. He moved to Antioch, in Contra Costa County, with a woman named Nancy Garrido, who would later become his wife. He settled at 1554 Walnut Avenue. The structure of his situation in 1988 was this. He was a federally convicted kidnapper and rapist, released after serving 1/5 of his sentence, living at a known address in a California suburb, required by law to report to parole supervision regularly and to submit to compliance checks at his place of residence. His status as a registered sex offender was a matter of public record. His parole file was active. In June 1991, 3 years after his release from federal prison, Garrido drove to South Lake Tahoe, the same city where he had committed his first documented kidnapping, and took an 11-year-old girl from a residential street. He drove her back to 1554 Walnut Avenue. He held her there for 18 years. His parole file remained active for every one of those years. His address never changed. The California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation and the federal parole system maintained active supervision of Philip Garrido from 1988 through 2009. During the 18 years of Jaycee Dugard's captivity, 1991 to 2009, Garrido was subject to regular parole compliance visits at his residence. In 2009, following Jaycee's discovery and Garrido's arrest, the California Office of the Inspector General conducted a formal review of the parole supervision record. The report, released in November 2009, is a public document. Its findings are specific, and they are damning. According to the Inspector General's report, parole officers made approximately 60 visits to the Garrido property over the course of the supervision period. The backyard compound the system of sheds, tents, and enclosed structures in which Jaycee and her 2 daughters were living was never discovered during any of those visits. In documented instances, parole officers conducted what the record classified as compliance visits, but did not conduct searches of the property sufficient to locate a concealed living area behind the main structure. The Inspector General's report found that some visits were inadequately documented, and that the supervision provided did not meet the standards required for an offender of Garrido's conviction profile. Garrido had been convicted of kidnapping and rape. His supervision conditions existed precisely because his record established him as a high-risk offender. The visits that were supposed to enforce those conditions did not result in a search of his backyard. 60 visits, 18 years, 3 people living in a compound behind the house. The report further found that tips received from the community were not adequately acted upon. The supervision record contained gaps that the Inspector General characterized as failures of process, not merely failures of individual judgment. The system, as designed and as implemented, did not work. In 1999, a neighbor of Philip Garrido's contacted law enforcement. The neighbor reported that Garrido appeared to have children living in tents in his backyard. The neighbor described the situation as unusual. The report was a direct, specific observation. A person living adjacent to 1554 Walnut Avenue had seen children on the property, had found the circumstances concerning enough to contact authorities, and had documented that concern in a formal tip. At that point, Jaycee Dugard had been held on the property for 8 years. She was 19 years old. Her first daughter, conceived when Jaycee was 13 and born in 1994, was 5 years old. Her second daughter had not yet been born. The tip was not adequately followed up on. According to the Inspector General's 2009 report, the response to the neighbor's report did not include a parole compliance check that searched the backyard of the property. No officer went behind the main structure. No contact was made with the children the neighbor had reported seeing. A parole compliance check on a federally convicted kidnapper and rapist, prompted by a neighbor's specific report of children living in tents on his property, was the procedural mechanism that existed precisely for this circumstance. Garrido was an active parolee. His supervision conditions authorized, and under these circumstances required a search of his residence. The authority to act was present. The tip that justified acting was present. The action was not taken. Jaycee's first daughter was 5 years old. She had been born in a backyard compound in Antioch. She had not been reported to any civil authority. Her birth was not on record. She did not, in any official sense, exist. A proper response to the 1,999 tip would have established that children were present on the property, that those children had no documented existence, and that the property of a convicted sex offender contained a concealed living structure. None of that was established. The tip was received and not acted on. In 2006, an Antioch Police Department officer responded to a call at the Garrido property on Walnut Avenue. The nature of the call brought the officer into contact with Garrido at his residence. The officer's documented response concluded without further action. According to reporting by the Los Angeles Times and subsequent coverage confirmed by the Inspector General's findings, the officer did not run Garrido's name through California's Megan's Law sex offender database during the visit. The Megan's Law database is a public registry. It is accessible to law enforcement officers as a routine procedural step. Running the name of a resident encountered during a property call against sex offender registries is a standard practice. Had the officer run Garrido's name, the record would have returned his status as a registered sex offender with a federal conviction for kidnapping and rape. That information would have triggered a different response. It would have required escalation. It would have required contact with parole authorities and a compliance check. By 2006, Jaycee Dugard had been held at 1554 Walnut Avenue for 15 years. Both of her daughters had been born, the first in 1994, the second in 1997. All three were living on the property. Jaycee was 26 years old. Her daughters were 12 and 9. The officer completed the call and left. Garrido's name was not checked against the registry. The property was not searched. The matter was closed. This is not a complex procedural failure. It is a basic one. The step that was not taken is not an obscure investigative technique that requires specialized training or resources. It is the act of entering a name into a database that exists and is accessible and is maintained for exactly this purpose. The failure was procedural and it was documented. It was not the last failure, but it was among the most direct a law enforcement officer standing at the address where 3 people were being held, performing a task that had a known and simple mechanism for identifying the person at the door as a high-risk registered sex offender, and not performing it. The California Office of the Inspector General released its report on the supervision of Philip Garrido on the 5th of November 2009, approximately 2 months after Garrido's arrest and Jaycee's discovery. The report is 31 pages. Its conclusions are stated plainly. The Inspector General found that the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation's Division of Adult Parole Operations failed to adequately supervise Garrido. Specifically, the report found that parole agents conducted visits to the property without searching the backyard area, that the 1,999 neighbor tip was not properly investigated, and that documentation of supervision visits was, in some cases, inaccurate or incomplete, meaning that the record of what parole officers had done at the property did not accurately reflect what had actually occurred during those visits. The report stated that Garrido's case should have been classified at a higher supervision level given his conviction profile, and that the level of oversight applied to him was inconsistent with the standards required for an offender with his history. The failure to classify him appropriately resulted in a supervision intensity that was insufficient for the risk he represented. The Inspector General did not attribute the failure to a single officer or a single decision. The report described the failure as systemic, embedded in the procedures, classification standards, and documentation practices of the parole supervision apparatus as a whole. Individual agents operated within a system that did not require them to search backyards, that did not flag a 1,999 tip for mandatory follow-up, and that did not catch falsified or incomplete visit documentation in real time. The report exists. Its findings are public. The state of California produced a formal document in 2009 that described, in institutional language and specific operational terms, how its own supervision system had failed to find a kidnapped child who was living 200 miles from where she disappeared, at an address that was on file. In 2010, Jaycee Dugard reached a settlement with the state of California. The amount was $20 million. The settlement was paid. The state of California did not go to trial on the question of whether the parole supervision system had failed Jaycee Dugard. It settled. The $20 million figure represents the state's resolution of a civil claim that its parole supervision failures directly contributed to the duration of Jaycee's captivity that had supervision been conducted. Adequately, she could have been found years, or potentially more than a decade, before she was. A settlement is not a judicial finding of liability. That is a precise legal distinction. It is also, in practice, a statement about what a government entity determined it could defend in court. California had an Inspector General report documenting systemic supervision failures. California had a 1,999 tip that went unaddressed. California had a 2006 officer visit where a registry check was not performed. California settled for $20 million. The settlement is a matter of public record. It is a data point in the accountability picture. and it is the most concrete institutional acknowledgement of what the Inspector General's report described. The state paid. The amount it paid is known. The reason it paid is documented. By 2009, Philip Garrido had been supervised by federal and state parole authorities for over 2 decades. His file was active, his address was on record, and in all of that time, it was not a parole officer who found Jaycee Dugard. It was a campus police officer at UC Berkeley who noticed that a registered sex offender was behaving strangely with 2 young girls. The property at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch was a residential lot in a residential neighborhood. From the street, it looked like the other houses on the block. The front of the property was ordinary. The back was not. Behind the main structure, Philip Garrido had built a compound of sheds, outbuildings, and enclosed tent structures that extended across the rear of the lot. This was where Jaycee lived. She describes it in A Stolen Life, the specific geography of the space, the way the structures were arranged, the way the property came to constitute the entire physical boundary of her world. She was taken there in June 1991 at the age of 11. She would not leave it in any meaningful sense for years. In 1994, when Jaycee was 13 years old, she gave birth to a daughter. The birth took place on the property, without medical assistance. The child was not registered with any civil authority. She had no birth certificate. She did not exist in any official record. In 1997, Jaycee gave birth to a second daughter under the same conditions. That child was also unregistered. Both daughters grew up on the property. The 3 of them, Jaycee and her 2 daughters, lived within the compound, moving through the enclosed structures and the limited outdoor space of the backyard. Garrido operated a small printing business from the property. Jaycee was involved in the work. According to her memoir and the court record from Garrido's 2011 sentencing proceedings, she handled aspects of the business's operations, correspondence, administrative tasks, work that required contact with the outside world through electronic and written communication. That contact was mediated and controlled. It was not freedom. It was labor performed in captivity, on a property in Antioch, on an active parole file, during regular supervision visits that did not find her. The years passed in the way that years pass in an enclosed space. Jaycee describes the texture of that time, the way the seasons changed, the way her daughters grew, the way the boundaries of the compound became the limits of a daily existence that was entirely removed from the life that had been taken from her on Washoan Boulevard. She was 11 when she arrived. She was 29 when she left. While Jaycee Dugard was living in a backyard compound in Antioch, her name remained in the National Crime Information Center Missing Persons database. Her case file in El Dorado County was open. She had not been found, and she had not been declared deceased. She remained, in the language of the system, an active missing persons case. The case received periodic attention in the years following 1991. Her name appeared in missing persons reviews. Her photograph circulated in the documentation that accumulates around a long-term open case. In 2009, the Charlie Project, a nonprofit database of cold case missing persons, had an active entry for Jaycee Lee Dugard, listing her disappearance date as the 10th of June 1991 and her status as missing. The National Center for Missing and Exploited Children maintained her file. Her age-progressed photograph had been updated the standard practice for long-term missing persons cases involving children, which produces a projected image of what the missing person might look like as an adult. An age-progressed image of Jaycee Dugard, showing what investigators estimated she might look like in her 20s, was in public circulation. No tip generated by any of this activity led investigators to 1554 Walnut Avenue. No review of the open case produced a connection to Antioch, to Contra Costa County, or to Philip Garrido. The systems that are designed to maintain the visibility of missing persons cases maintained her visibility. They did not find her. She remained a photograph and a file number in a database while she was living 200 miles away, under a name she had been given by the man who had taken her. It is the 24th of August 2009. Philip Garrido arrives on the campus of the University of California, Berkeley. He is accompanied by 2 young girls. He wants to request permission to hold a religious gathering on campus grounds. He approaches campus staff with this request. UC Berkeley campus police officer Allison Jacobs observes Garrido. His behavior is erratic. The 2 young girls with him are notably quiet, and the dynamic between them and Garrido registers as unusual. Officer Jacobs decides to investigate further. She runs Garrido's name through the system. He is a registered sex offender with a federal conviction for kidnapping and rape. Officer Jacobs contacts Garrido's parole officer. She does not arrest him on the spot. She directs him to report, the following day, to the Contra Costa County Probation Department office in Concord, California, and to bring with him the girls and the adult woman accompanying him. Garrido agrees. He leaves the campus. At no point during this encounter is anyone looking for Jaycee Dugard. Officer Jacobs is responding to behavioral observations about a registered sex offender accompanied by children. The encounter is not triggered by the Dugard case file. It is not the result of an investigative connection to the 1991 abduction. It is the result of a campus police officer doing her job on an ordinary Monday afternoon at a university in Berkeley, observing, running a name, and directing a man with a concerning profile to appear before supervision authorities. The case that had been open for 6,649 days is about to break, not because anyone found it, because a man walked onto a campus with children and behaved in a way that a single officer found worth acting on. On the morning of the 25th of August 2009, Philip Garrido arrives at the Contra Costa County Probation Department office in Concord. With him are Nancy Garrido, 2 girls, and a woman who identifies herself as Alyssa. Alyssa is Jaycee Dugard. She is 29 years old. The initial interviews at the probation office proceed with all 4 of them present. Jaycee, using the name Alyssa, does not immediately disclose her identity or her situation. This is documented in the court record and consistent with her account in A Stolen Life. 18 years of captivity had produced a set of adaptive behaviors that included presenting a constructed identity in encounters with authority figures, because every prior encounter with the outside world had occurred under Garrido's control. Probation officers separate the 4 individuals. Garrido is interviewed alone. Nancy Garrido is interviewed separately. The 2 girls, Jaycee's daughters, aged 15 and 11, are interviewed separately. Jaycee, alone, is questioned. During the questioning, she discloses. The account she gives leads investigators to contact El Dorado County. The name Jaycee Lee Dugard is matched against the NCIC database. The match comes back. The case file that has been open since the 10th of June 1991 returns a result. She is 29 years old. The daughters with her are 15 and 11. None of them have ever been to a doctor using their real names. None of them have official records of existence. The younger daughter had never been off the property at 1554 Walnut Avenue for most of her life. Philip and Nancy Garrido are arrested on the 25th of August 2009. Law enforcement executes a search of the property at 1554 Walnut Avenue in Antioch on August 25 and 26, 2009. What they find in the backyard confirms what Jaycee has described. The compound consists of multiple structures, wooden outbuildings, tent-like enclosures, and a network of connected spaces built up across the rear portion of the residential lot. The structures are not makeshift in the sense of being temporary. They have accumulated over years. Some of them are furnished. There is electrical wiring. There are areas that function as sleeping quarters, as living space, as work areas. The physical evidence recovered from the compound establishes the duration of the occupation. The structures show years of use and modification. Personal items belonging to Jaycee and her daughters, accumulated over the course of 18 years, are present throughout the compound. DNA testing is conducted. The results confirm that Philip Garrido is the biological father of both of Jaycee's daughters. The confirmation is formal and it is entered into the court record. It establishes the full scope of what the property at 1554 Walnut Avenue had contained and for how long. The compound is photographed, documented, and processed as a crime scene. The images produced by that documentation, the physical structures, the enclosed spaces, the accumulated evidence of years of contained life constitute the physical record of what parole supervision visits to this address had failed to find across approximately 60 visits over 18 years. The compound found in August 2009 had not been built overnight. The structures documented by law enforcement in the days following Jaycee's discovery were the accumulated result of years of construction and habitation. Tents and outbuildings of this kind do not appear fully formed. They are built incrementally, extended over time, modified as the needs of the people living in them change. Jaycee arrived at the property in June 1991. Her first daughter was born there in 1994, her second in 1997. By any physical account, structures capable of housing 3 people across the years documented in the court record had been present on the property well before the final years of Garrido's supervision period. The 1,999 neighbor who reported children living in tents in the backyard was not describing a new development. They were describing something that had been there long enough to be visible from a neighboring property. The address was on the parole file from the beginning. The visits were conducted at the address. The backyard was accessible from the address. The compound was in the backyard. These are not contested facts. They are the facts the Inspector General's 2009 report worked from, and they are the facts that the state of California's $20 million settlement did not dispute. In 2011, Philip Garrido stood in a courtroom and pleaded guilty to 29 counts. Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty alongside him. But the Inspector General's report, the one that documented the visits that found nothing, the tip that was ignored, the officer who never ran the name that report, had no defendant. On the 28th of April, 2011, Philip Garrido entered a guilty plea in El Dorado County Superior Court. He pleaded guilty to 29 counts, including kidnapping, rape, and related charges. The sentence imposed was 431 years to life in state prison. Nancy Garrido pleaded guilty on the same date to charges including kidnapping and rape. Her sentence was 36 years to life. There was no trial. The absence of a trial is a factual detail with structural significance. A trial would have required the presentation of evidence in open court, the examination and cross-examination of witnesses, and the public construction of a complete factual record. A guilty plea resolves the criminal matter without that process. The convictions are on record. The supervision failures, documented in the Inspector General's report, were not examined in a criminal proceeding. No parole officer was charged. No agency was the subject of criminal accountability. The criminal case ended with 2 people in custody and a plea on the record. The systemic questions it raised were addressed elsewhere, in a different kind of proceeding, with a different kind of outcome. The civil accountability record is documented and specific. In 2010, the state of California settled Jaycee Dugard's civil claim for $20 million. The settlement was paid without the state contesting the underlying question of whether its parole supervision had failed her. The Inspector General's 2009 report remained the formal public record of what had gone wrong and why. Following the case, the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation implemented changes to its protocols for monitoring high-risk sex offenders on parole. These included revised standards for residence checks specifically, requirements for parole agents to conduct searches of the full property, including outbuildings and rear areas, during compliance visits. The changes were adopted in direct response to what the Garrido supervision record had revealed. The changes are documented. The $20 million is documented. The Inspector General's findings are documented. What the public record does not contain is a criminal proceeding in which any individual within the parole supervision system was held personally accountable for the failures the Inspector General identified. The civil settlement closed one question. The other has not been opened in a courtroom. Jaycee's 2 daughters were present with her on the 25th of August 2009 when she disclosed her identity at the Contra Costa County Probation Department. They were 15 and 11 years old. They had been born on the property at 1554 Walnut Avenue. They had grown up there. Their subsequent lives are not part of the public record, and they are not the subject of this account. They were minors at the time of recovery. What is documented is this. Jaycee has consistently described her relationship with her daughters as the center of her life during captivity and after it. In A Stolen Life, she writes about them with a directness that is not the language of victimhood, it is the language of a parent. They were, in her account, not evidence of what was done to her. They were her children. That distinction is hers, and it is drawn clearly in her own words. They were with her when she came back. That is what the record shows. In 2009, shortly after her recovery, Jaycee Dugard established the Jaycee Foundation. The name is an acronym, Just Ask Yourself to Care. The foundation's stated mission is to support families who have experienced the abduction of a child and to provide trauma recovery resources for survivors and the people close to them. The foundation operates family camp programs, providing structured recovery experiences for families navigating the aftermath of abduction and trauma. In 2011, Jaycee published A Stolen Life, a memoir written entirely in her own words, with no co-author. The book describes her captivity from her own perspective, in her own voice, organized by her own choices about what to include and how to frame it. It became a bestseller. She has given selected interviews since her recovery, appearing publicly on her own terms and in contexts she has chosen. She has not been a continuous public presence. She has been a selective one, present when she has chosen to be present, private when she has chosen privacy. The Jaycee Foundation is an ongoing organization. A Stolen Life remains in print. Both are choices she made, not conditions imposed on her by the fact of her case. The foundation serves other families. The memoir serves readers who want to understand what she experienced from her own account rather than from the accounts of others. She built both of these things. They exist because she built them. In the opening of A Stolen Life, Jaycee Dugard writes that she wanted to tell her own story, not have it told for her, not have it filtered through the case file or the news coverage or the legal proceedings. Her story, in her words, starting from her own memory of who she was and what she experienced. She was 11 years old in South Lake Tahoe in the summer of 1991. She walked down a hill every school morning on Washoe and Boulevard. She had a cat. She was in 5th grade. She was close with her mother and her younger sister. She was, by every account from the people who knew her and by her own description, a quiet and friendly and warm child who was at the particular threshold between childhood and adolescence with a full life ahead of her, in a house on a residential street, in a neighborhood at 6,237 feet in the Sierra Nevada. She was taken from that life on a Monday morning. The walk she made that day was the same walk she had made every other school day. Nothing about it was different until the car slowed. She spent 6,570 days on a property in Antioch, California at an address that was on file. And on the 25th of August 2009, she sat in a room in a probation office in Concord, separated from the man who had controlled her life since she was 11 years old, and told a stranger her real name. She was 29 years old. She had 2 daughters. She had lost 18 years. She had also, by every account she has given since, held onto something in herself that 18 years in a compound in a backyard did not take. She came back. She built things. She is still here. Jaycee Dugard did not disappear. She was taken from a specific street on a specific morning by a man who is supposed to be watched. What happened after that is documented. What it cost is documented. And Jaycee herself made sure of it. If this case stayed with you, the next one will too. Subscribe to Grim Intrigue and turn on notifications. We go deep on the cases where the full record hasn't been laid out in one place. Every case on this channel is built the same way. The documents, the record, the people. No shortcuts. The next video is already there when you're ready.